Well, thank you. So an introduction to ECMAScript. If you want to follow along, you can go to this URL, follow along the slides. It might be easier to read the code, but the screen's big enough. But before I begin my presentation, I asked Stephen who's my MC was going to be, and he said, well, it's going to be Dan Rubin, so the second handsomest man at the venue. Yeah, I think he thinks he's the handsomest man himself. So, then I looked up his profile picture and I saw this. I thought, yeah, well, that's a very cool beard. And now I'm disappointed. Now I see him. So why? That's not true. So, but this is me. I'm Paul Verbeek. And I work in Amsterdam at a company called In the Virtual. It's a development agency, and that's my Twitter handle. And I also run meetups in Amsterdam and the rest of the Netherlands called NL-HTML5. And I also organize a conference next month called the Polymer Summit. And I'm doing that with Google. There are still a few tickets left. It's going to be at an amazing venue in Amsterdam. So if you want to join us, please do. It's September 14th and 15th. But my presentation is not about all that. It's about ECMAScript. It's about ECMAScript 6 or ECMAScript 2015 or maybe ECMAScript Harmony. It's the ECMAScript Harmony is the development name. So, but first, let me explain what is ECMAScript. So ECMAScript is a specification written by a company called ECMA. And it's the specification number 262. Well, there are a lot of specification numbers. Seeing this is 262, you probably assume that there are at least 261 other. So you have ECMAScript 402. That's the Dart programming language. Well, probably some of you know that. There's also ECMA 222, which is adaptive lossless data compression algorithm. It's very important. There's also ECMA 74, which is measurements of airborne noise emitted by information technology and telecommunications equipment. They are at the 11th version of that, so that's probably very important as well. But this is ECMA 262, ECMAScript language specification. Well, the ECMAScript is being used not only in JavaScript, as you probably assumed, but it's also being used in ActionScript, which is used in Flash. So I hope not a lot of people are using this anymore. It's also used in Adobe ExtendScript. Does anybody know where Adobe ExtendScript is used in? You can use that in Photoshop and Illustrator and all other kinds of Adobe programs. It was also used in JScript, failed Microsoft experiments. That was actually JavaScript until IE9. It's used in JScript.net, which is, well, JScript in the .NET engine, and also, of course, in JavaScript. And I'm going to be talking mostly about the JavaScript implementation. So I'm going to be talking about this version, the 6th edition of ECMA 262, which is the ECMAScript 2015 language specification. So some people call it ECMAScript 6, others call it ECMAScript 2015. I just call it ES6. It's the shortest and it doesn't take a lot of time because I'm lazy, just like Vasilis. But let's first talk about ECMAScript 5.1. ECMAScript 5.1 brought a lot of cool new features like strict mode, which generates errors because that's what it does. It generates errors. That was the whole point about it. And JSON and a lot of other functionalities. It brought a bunch of cool things, and most of it is already in all browsers. ECMAScript 6 brings a lot more. It brings arrow functions, new literals, clauses, a pretty long list, which I will not go through everything because this is an introduction. I will talk to you about these 7 things. I'll talk to you about arrow functions, about block scoped variables, about clauses, the default res and spread parameters, destructuring, modules, and template strings. So you might have wondered why I chose these 7. It's because I used these 7. It's easy. So first off, I will start with block scope variables. And this is my cue to drink something. So in ES 5.1, well, if you want to log Dan Rubin's name, then you can do it like this. It's strange to do it like this, but you can do it. Because, well, the var is function scoped. And not like in many other languages, it's not block scoped. What happens in JavaScript is actually this. It puts the name on top and put it undefined, and then you can change it. Now this might be confusing for people who are just new to the language, or if you read someone else's code that uses this, it could be very confusing. So ES6 brings block scope variables. So instead of a var, you can use a let. I actually asked the question on the internet, does anybody know what let stands for? I didn't get an answer. I hope someone in this room knows. No. A verb? What does? Allow. Yeah, but that doesn't make sense, right? So, well, that's another thing. But let is block scope, so it only exists inside the if statement. It can also exist inside a for loop. So if you want to log more Dans, not just Dan Rubin, but also Dan Aykroyd or Dan Stevens, you can have this I inside of the for, and it will not exist outside of it. That's very handy if you use more for loops inside of a function. You can always use the same variable for that. But other than that, let is just the same as var. So if how you created a global variable, it will still be a global variable when you do it the same way with let, and the same goes for function scoped. So what I mean by this is that you can basically just switch var with let, and then you will have block scope variables. I'm not using var anymore, so I don't see a use case for var. It's just something I think they fixed. There's one other thing, let, you can't declare let twice. So if you have a let called name and you try to declare it for the second time, you can't. It will just generate an error. Something like identifier name has already been defined. There's one more block scope variable instead of let. There's also a constant. So if you want to create a constant called Dan, and you want to change that, it will just say Dan is read only. But there's one strange thing. If you put an object inside of a constant and you want to change one of the parameters inside of the object, it will just work. So I was, what the fuck? How can this happen? Well, it's because it's a pointer to an object. So you can change the object inside of it, but you can't change the object itself. So if you want to change the entire object, it will say it's read-only. That's something you can just, it's something you wrap your head around for a bit, but just don't use objects inside of constants. It's basically my tip. So the second cool thing in ES6 is destructuring, but let me first explain the difference between constructing and extracting. Say you want to construct an object. You can do this with single values. In this case, I want to create an object called name, and it has a first name and last name. You can do this with single values, as you can always do. And you can also do it with multiple values at the same time, like this. Well, most of the people working with JavaScript knows how this works. Extracting is actually just extracting things from an object. So you can do that with single values like this, but in ES5, there's no way to do that with multiple values, at least not an easy way to do that. This changes in ES6 because you can just use the same way as you would construct it. This is what destructuring is. This is called destructuring. So you put the variable names inside curly braces, and it will just insert the first and the last inside of the new variables. You can also do this another way. So if you want to put in it in a new variable called first name, you do it like this. This is a bit strange because you actually say put the first, which we declared there, inside of first name. It feels like the other way around. Don't really know why that is yet, but this is how they've done it for ES6. You can also use it as a parameter inside of a function. So in this case, you can just put the entire name object inside the function, and it will generate two different variables called first name and last name that you can use inside of the function. And there's also arrays. You can use destructuring for arrays as well. If you have an array with Dan and Ruben inside of it, you can easily put it inside of a first name and last name variable like this. And if for some reason Dan decides to switch his first name and last name, you can also switch the variables. So now the first name is Ruben and the last name is Dan. And you can also use it for regular expressions, because the exec function in regular expressions returns an array of all the groups. So in this case, you will have 4 new variables. Okay, so modules. Modules are it's something I use a lot. Say you have a file called modules/mod.js, and you have a constant which is called pi, or at least the pi sign. You can export this, and with export you can import it inside of another file. Say you have a file called main.js, you can import this constant. Like this, you can just import pi from modules/mod.js, and then you can use it inside your main.js. Some people don't think the pi sign is a good variable name, so they can just say pi as pi, the variable name, which is easier. But as you see, it's also a constant, and it remains a constant inside this new variable. It just inherits that. You can use constants, you can use vars, you can use lets. You can also use functions and clauses to export. And you can, in this case, you just add the square next to the initial declaration of the pi. And then you can use this square function inside your main.js. And if you want to import everything from one particular file, you can just say use star as math, and then it will generate an object called math with all the functions and variables inside of it. The thing here is that now pi isn't a constant anymore because it's inside of an object. And as we just learned, constants inside objects will not be constants anymore. But other than that, it's very handy like this. And there's one more way to export something. Say you have a module called foo, and you can just say export the default function, and whenever you import that, you can name it whatever you'd like. So there's no limitations for that. So then we also have arrow functions. Arrow functions are, in the most basic, less typing, which I like. So if we have the ECMAScript 5, the JavaScript map function, and we want to multiply everything, so it will it will square everything, and we have to do it like this in old ES5. Oh, it's called SS6, isn't it, right? Well, so it has a function with an a as parameter, which returns a times a. As a arrow function, this is the parameter. You have an equal sign and a greater than sign, which is actually says this is going to be an arrow function, and then you say a times a, which then returns it. It's when you're used to it, it's a lot more readable. But that's not the only thing that arrow functions do. They also create a lexical this, is what they call it, which basically means that you don't have to do var that is this or var self is this anymore. So in ES5, if you want a button with a event listener that calls this handle click that's over here, you can do this.handleClick because this will be the button. So you have to create a new variable called that or self or whatever you like, and then you put the this inside of it so you can use it over there. With arrow functions, you can do it like this. So you do empty parentheses because you don't want a new parameter inside of it. And then you can just use this.handleClick because it will use the this from its parent. It will remain the same this. And this is very helpful in a lot of things to make it more readable, more understandable. And that's the basics of arrow functions. There's more to do with that, but as I said, an introduction, I can't cover everything in 45 minutes. But I can cover template strings. Template strings are, again, something to make your code more readable. So in ES5, if you put an enter inside of a string, it will just return an error. If you do it in ES6, it will log a new line as long as you use a backtick. Some people think, a what? A backtick. Or for the French, an accent grave. So this sign instead of that sign. I don't know where it's on your keyboard, but mine is on the top left. Which basically turns your string to a template string. And then you can use new lines as enters, and there are a bunch more features like using variables inside of it. So in ES5, you had to concatenate it with pluses, and it will become quite unreadable. While in ES6, you can use it like this with a $sign and curly braces. So you get it. Most of the things in ES6 will make your code more readable, more understandable, and easier to maintain. That also goes for classes. Classes are actually nothing more than some syntactical sugar on top of functions. So if you want to create a function called person in ES5, it's probably not the best way to do it, but I will just create a fast example. You can have a first name and last name inside of it, so you have to do that inside of the function, and then you want to have a full name, which returns the first name and the last name, and you have a toString, which just returns the string called my name is, and then the full name. With the prototypes and things like that, it will become quite not unreadable, but it's less readable than what you would like. In ES6, we have classes. So this will, again, make it more readable, easier to maintain, and also easier to extend. Whenever you do, in this case, new person, it will first call the constructor. And the constructor has parameters, and you can do whatever you like, and it is like an initializer for your new person. As you see, I also use a getter, like here. A getter is something. Oh, you have a question? Yeah, that's true. Sorry, it's a mistake in my code. So, just for the camera, he asked if this was the if this should actually log my name is Paul Verbeek, and he's true. This should be something else. So I use a getter, which is a part of ES5, but is not used by a lot of people. It just has no parameters, and it will return whatever you have here without parentheses. It has more than that, but if you want to know what it does fully, just look it up for getters and setters. It's pretty cool. You can see I also use the template strings in here, and it will just it's a lot more readable. It's inside of the class. It uses the prototypes as well, but you just don't have to write it. And you can also extend classes with new classes. So say you want an employee class, which also logs the company the person works for. Well, in this case, I say class employee extend person, and in the constructor, I say super, and super is a reference to the super class, so its parent. So I say super first name, last name. It will call the constructor of that superclass. So it will just assign the new things in this.first name and this.last name, like it did over here. And I add the new company. I also want to change the toString because I want to add the company. So inside the template string, I say super.toString, which then again calls the toString of the super function. And I add and I work at this.company. As you might notice, I didn't add the full name in there because we don't want to change that function. This is what classes does, and it has, again, a lot more inside of it. So I come to the last thing of my talk, and that's called default rest and spread parameters. So say you want a function called multiply, and the basic thing the function does is multiply the first parameter with 2, and if you do this, if you add 2 parameters, it will multiply with each other. So in this case, it will be 3 times 2 equals 6, and 3 times 3 equals 9. If you want to do that in ES5, it will be something like this. So you have to check if y is undefined. If so, then y will become 2, and then you return x times y. In ES6, you can do it like this. So you can just say y equals true. Whenever you don't put a second parameter inside of it, so you don't put anything at the y, then it will just be 2. Again, makes it more readable. You could do something like this with ES5, but it will just help you a lot with writing faster code. Then we have rest and spread parameters. A spread or a rest is always 3 dots before your parameter name. So say I have a foo variable and I want everything that's being put inside my function inside of the foo variable as an array. Now, normally it will come inside of an argument if you don't have a parameter. I think it's inside of the arguments variable, I think, which is kind of like an array but not exactly. And this will just be an array which you named. But it can also be, you can also split arrays again. So if you put the dots inside of it, so this is called a rest, and this is called a spread because you spread the array. And if you do it inside of an array, it will actually concatenate to the array that you put it in. So in this case, it will log the numbers 4, 8, 15, 16, 23, 42. This is really handy with if you get arrays passed through some sort of REST API or something. Okay, so people wonder most of the time, how can I use this in my current projects? And I say, yes, you can do it with Bevel, but that will generate an ES5 file for you. So Bevel is something you can use in Grunt or in Gulp or any other type of environment. And you put your code inside of it, and it will generate, well, readable ES5. There are a lot of other tools that can do that, like Tracer. Tracer is a lot like Bevel, only Bevel generates code that looks like your own written code, which I like. There's also TypeScript from Microsoft, which does the same thing, but also adds types to it. I haven't used that so far, but I want to stick to the ES6 syntax. So what kind of code will Bevel generate? So let's say this first example. If you put that through Bevel, it will generate this. So it looks a lot the same. What it did is use strict at the top, because ES6 is always in strict mode. It adds an underscore here, because this will not be the same variable you're using here, because it's block scoped. And it will still say name is not defined. This is a very easy example, but you can see that it will generate a code that looks a lot like your own code. So let's take the last example. If you have with the spread and the rest parameters. If you do this, put this through Bevel, you will get this. It will have the arguments which you normally have. It will split it into a new full variable, which is used. It will then use a concat to concatenate the arrays that you now have, and then it will log the numbers. It will be a bit more code, but it will be about the same thing you would have done if you've written it in ES5 yourself, probably. So, if you want to learn more on ES6, everything that I haven't talked about, you can go to exploringjs.com, which is a great book by Dr. Axel Rauschmeier. He basically says everything about ES6, explains everything very good. And I've learned a lot from that. Oh, sorry, take a picture. Yeah? So, now you know the basics of ES6 and the basics of ECMAScript 2015, also the basics of Harmony, and the basics of ECMAScript 262 6th edition, which is a lot of basics to cover. But I haven't covered everything, as I said. This is still a long list of things that you can use with ES6, like promises, symbols, which are unique values. Unicode support is finally, I think, almost 100%. So there's a lot to cover. And of course, the things that I haven't covered on my subject as well. So this was me. And my Twitter handle. And if you want to look at the slides, you can go to this URL. So before we begin with the questions of you guys, there was a question from Vasilis. Last week, I met Vasilis at a party, and I was explaining the talk I was going to give, and he said, "But Paul, why are browser vendors working on making the developer's life easier, where they should be focusing on making the user's life easier?" So that's basically what you said, right? Yeah. So I thought about it, and I answered him with this. So first of all, it's easier to write, so you will have less development time, which you will spend more time doing other things. Well, Vasilis would probably just look at the ceiling for a while. Well, I would focus on accessibility or creating new functionalities for the user. Also, it's code that's easier to maintain, so you will have less technical depth, which will also mean that if you ever want to improve something in your project, you don't have to use it by improving your code, but just improving your product. And once ES6 hits all the browsers and you can use it without Bevel, it will be faster code execution, and which will mean happier users. So, are there any other questions? Yes. So, I wanted. So yeah, it's the question was if you do use this on a production site and it will generate the ES5 code, and you want to fix a bug, you have to fix it in the ES5 code, right? So and then yeah, so you. Yeah. So the question was if it's very hard to maintain something like that. Well, well, it is maintainable. So what I use is source maps. So I can easily find where the bug is from ES5. So where it is in my ES6 code. Bevel actually generates a lot of errors if it finds errors in your code, and it will generate something that's workable in IE 8 and above. There was a time that I found a bug inside of my ES5 code, which I couldn't find in my ES6 code, which was a typo somewhere, but which is most of the time hard to find. But I haven't found it very hard to maintain it because most of the errors that are generated, it's easy to find with source maps. Does that answer your question? Well, we can talk about it later if you want. Yeah. So the question is if it's faster because Bevel uses ES5, and also if if you use Bevel, it will be ES5. That's true. So there's no performance in because it just doesn't use ES6, but it will generate fast code. It has generated for me faster code that I could write, that I have written on my own, because Bevel will generate fast ES5 code. Yeah, so you can if a browser supports everything you want to use in ES6, like block scope variables and classes, you can just use that ES6 file. So Chrome supports a couple of things, Firefox supports other things, so you can just check what's supported, and if everything you use is supported, then you can just load that file for those browsers. Yeah. So then they will gain the performance win.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So how do you go about like the API changes that come with ES6 that are not ready yet? Well, what do you prefer like for object assign or maybe promises in some older browsers? How do you go about there?
So the question is if
you want to use the API changes, like the API changes of the browser that come with ES6 as well.
Yes.
There is not only
Right, yeah, so there is object assign is one of the examples that it enhances the object that's already existed. So how do you go about with that? Well, well, Bevel also can also help you make use of that. There are also a lot of polyfills, of course, that if you just want to use object.assign, there is a polyfill that's easy to use for that. So if you just want a small subset of it, I would recommend using a polyfill instead of Bevel. But if you're using all the ES6 functions, if you just want to use everything, then I would recommend using Bevel. Are there any other questions over there?
Yes, sir.
So the question is there is a roadmap on when ES6 is supported on all browsers? No. So there are some parts that's already you already can use in some browsers, but well, it's just when ES6 is implemented in all of the major browsers, then we'll probably have ES7, which is already, some features already inside of Bevel you can use. Or maybe ES8 is already out. So this will be a continuous development for the JavaScript language, for the ECMAScript language. So it depends on how fast the browsers implement this. I think the one browser that supports the most ES6 features is surprisingly Microsoft Edge. So yes, Microsoft Edge has actually pushed a lot of the ES6 features, and it's one of their main keys that we have the best JavaScript support. On the surface, yes. And any other questions? So the question is if you can use it for, if you can use ECMAScript 6 for mobile devices without using Babel. Yeah, so if you have a separate site for just mobile devices, no, because Safari is very bad at implementing ES6. So actually, I think that's one of the worst browsers for ES6. In the back? Yeah? Destructuring, yeah? Yeah. So the question is if there is any logic with the destructuring that the assignment of the variables is the other way around. Well, there is a logic behind it. It's because you actually extract it from the variable. Well, I think you should look it up because I can't say it from the top of my head.
Yeah, on the left-hand side, you kind of define an extraction pattern.
Yeah.
Right?
So
that gets applied to the right-hand side, and then you extract it.
So on the left-hand side, you have the extraction pattern. On the right-hand side, you have the new variable. That's which it's going to get in. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. Oh, one more.
Let's put one more question in, and then we'll if you have further things to discuss with Paul, we'll have an extended coffee break for this room.
Yes.
Which is good because apparently the other room got an extended lunch. So we need to catch up with them. So yes, one more question.
Yeah, so the question was, what about private and public modifiers for classes? Private and public is part of ECMAScript 7. If you put the experimental flag inside of Bevel, you can use private and public. I wouldn't recommend it because it's not finalized yet, while ES6 is finalized. So it's a great addition, but I would just wait for it before it's really going to be before you would make sure that's inside of ECMAScript 7.